Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers, and this episode is I'm going to call this a real insightful banger, because dating in your 30s is a very stigmatized /important / meaningful / meaningless pursuit, depending on who you are, depending where you are in your journey with dating, but also it's laden with societal expectations, rules that we think we have to abide by, and so forth. And in this episode with Emma Wilson, who's a coach who specializes in coaching people who are turning 30. So she really specializes in people who are moving from their 20s into their 30s into their kind of mid-30s. And she has a real specialty in working with single women. As you'll hear, she worked with a container of women who are just single women and helping them through their dating journey and their life journey recently. So she has a real expertise in working with single women and bringing to that the table of my understanding and expertise in working with men and single men. I've worked with a lot of single men over the last couple of years. We bring together our knowledge of what women are looking for in dating in their 30s, and we can kind of compare that to men, and you're going to start to see some really interesting findings. You're going to start to see some interesting things that come out. It's a very good episode, and an episode that listening very intently, and even twice. I don't say this often, apart from if you're one of my coaching clients, I will often tell them to listen to episodes twice. Listen to the episode twice, because you can listen to it once and just kind of listen. And the second time when you listen to something, you really take it in, because you hear the things you missed the first time and you re-hear the points that impacted you. So it's a really good episode. It's a very, very insightful, lots of information, lots of knowledge, lots of things that you can take into your dating life and really change how you're operating in dating and change your dating experience, because ultimately that's what we really want to help people with. And, since we're in April now, and I've had a little bit of a break, on my retreats and so forth. I've got a few things coming up. On the topic of dating and relationships, I've got a free workshop. Won't cost you anything. It's a free workshop I'm running with my partner Orsa, called The Foundations of a Conscious Relationship. And that's on the 15th of May. And this is where we're really going to, we had a really big workshop that we ran a few months ago, back end of last year. And this one is a more streamlined workshop where the information will be a bit more easier to digest and take on, and it won't be as heavy, there won't be as much, but we're going to talk about the foundations, what builds a conscious relationship. And this is incredibly important, because I know that a lot of the listeners, the men and women that are listening to this podcast, is what they want. They want a more conscious, more connected, more passionate, more happy, more everything, more support relationship. And we're going to talk about how you create that. 15th of May. And it's free, so it doesn't cost you anything to sign up. The link will be in the show notes. The second thing that I've got coming up, which I'm incredibly excited about actually, because I've just been doing so much learning recently for my own practice as a man, and practice of being a more connected man, more open-hearted, more able to lead myself and lead other people, and my relationship is a men's program where I'm bringing in all those things I just talked about there. the relationship stuff, some dating stuff, because half the spots already been taken, and I know those men are single, so I'm going to be talking about dating. I'm going to talk about masculinity and leadership and sexuality and some tantric sex and tantric practices that we're bringing into that. And it's going to be an 8-week program. It's going to be live. You'll be jumping on calls with me every single week for 8 weeks, and those calls will be on Wednesdays through June. Each Wednesday in June, which has 5 of, and then 3 Wednesdays in July will be the first 3 Wednesdays. And if you're interested in that, if you enjoy listening to my podcast and you want to make a change, not just in your dating life, but in your career, in your in how you move through the world as a man, because if you're listening to this and you're listening to this regular, then that's the calling that you're feeling. So if that's the case, drop me an email just saying that you're interested in the program. It's probably the most cost-effective way to work with me, if I'm very honest. I've created this program so it's really cost-effective and it's accessible for people. And as I said, half the spots are already filled. So people are really eager for this. People who've listened to the podcast are jumping on. So, it's men like you. If you're hearing this and you're thinking, that sounds really interesting, I'd love to work with David and a group of men and connect with other men who are like-minded, then this program is for you, and you should just drop me an email. Or you can drop me an email, or you can give me an Instagram, either one. My email address is hello@theauthenticman.net, or you can give me an Instagram @theauthenticman_, and then we can have a chat about the program, and you can fill out the application form and so forth. But enough about what I got going on. You got this wonderful episode about what it is you can take away from dating, what women want when it comes to dating in the 30s. It's a juicy one. So sit down, enjoy. And without further ado, I'll let you get into the episode. Welcome back, listeners. Back for another episode. And this week, I am talking to a guest who's familiar to me, someone who I've spoken to before. It's a new guest to the podcast, but I've spoken to before as I was a guest on her podcast. And we had quite a rip-roaring conversation about dating, and particularly the topic of today, like dating in our 30s. And since I'm a late 30s man, just hanging in there now, just hanging in there. But I did a lot of dating in my 30s. I did a hell of a lot of dating in my 30s. And, I think there's a lot of cliches, there's a lot of myths around what women want from dating in their 30s. And if you're listening to this episode and thinking, I'm a woman, I want to know what men want, you can head over to her podcast, which is the Turning 30 podcast, and listen to the episode that we did that we talked about, what men are like when they're in their dating in their 30s. But today I have with me Emma Wilson, who is a Turning 30 coach.
Hi, David.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I've been really looking forward to speaking to you after our very popular podcast episode that we did. It was the end of last year, and it had such an amazing response from my audience. So I've been really looking forward to connecting again and having this conversation.
Yeah, it was a conversation actually that quite a few of my old coaching clients picked up on and listened to, and found it was really, really insightful to hear, your point of view from your own personal life, but also from the work that you do working with women as well.
Yeah, I think it's such a relevant topic. And I remember you saying, I'm not sure if you said it in the middle of the episode or after we pressed pause, that I made you sweat with all the questions that I asked, because I really put you on the spot and I made you responsible for all of your clients and all of mankind. But I think that we addressed some really important topics there, and I know that we're going to flip it around and talk about the myths the other way around today.
Yes, definitely. And a question I like to ask all my guests at the beginning of the episode is really just, what is your journey to do the work that you now that created you as a coach to people that are turning 30?
So my journey, wow, I never know how far to go back, because I could start at childhood, but I'll say that I've always had a strong interest in psychology, in humans, and human connection. I studied psychology for my undergraduate degree and really enjoyed it. And then my 20s consisted of going down what I call the path, the typical life path. And I went on to do a law degree, and I'm originally from Manchester in the UK, and I moved to London, followed the same motions that most of my friends were going through. I ended up getting a training contract and becoming a lawyer in London, and really feeling that this is what I was supposed to do. This is what I should do, but it definitely wasn't something that was where my passion lied. And although I love studying and I love studying law as a topic, the minute I stepped into that office in London and was getting the tube every day and I was in the corporate world, I quite quickly understood that it wasn't really what I wanted to do for the long run. And it was a really hard time. You know, it was in my mid-20s and my friends had just started to get into relationships and started, you know, settling down, some of them. And I was battling with lots of questions of, you know, where do I want to live? What do I want my career to be? Who am I? You know, the big questions that we ask. And I ended up leaving law, which is a really, really great decision. I finished my 2-year training contract, and I really look back and I'm grateful for the fact that even though at that point I hadn't discovered coaching yet, or hadn't, you know, discovered therapy or anything in this you know, field, but I definitely knew and listened to that knowing that I was going to do something else. And then I moved country, so I'm now based in Tel Aviv. I followed love to another country. That's a whole other story. And I decided career-wise to explore. I went and worked in sales, in events, lots of different things. And when I was turning 30, I had a great job. I was traveling a lot. I was really living the corporate dream. Again, just not law, something else. And as I was staring down the face of turning 30, I just asked myself, is this how I want the next decade to be? And it wasn't. There were so many things in my life that I wasn't satisfied with. I didn't like my career. I was single, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing, or isn't necessarily a bad thing, of course, but I wasn't enjoying my dating life. I was having toxic relationships at the time, and it was something that really bothered me. I wasn't in a healthy lifestyle, and I just got to the point at this, you know, pivotal age, which is a pivotal age for a lot of people, that I decided to really ask, okay, what do I want to do now? Where do I want to go? And that's what led me to coaching. So I got a career coach at this age, and I also discovered therapy. And my 29th to 30th year was a really big self-discovery year, really dove inwards, and it was amazing. And discovering coaching at that age was something huge for me, because not only did I learn so much about myself and, you know, do all of the work on myself, I also ended up finding a career that I loved. Now, it's not that simple, because at the age of 30, when I did decide I want to become a coach, you know, coaching, as I'm sure you know as well, it's not, you know, it's you can decide any day to become a coach, but actually running a successful coaching business does take a while to build the community. And at first I was helping people with careers. That was really also a passion of mine. I felt like I never really had that guidance, and I wanted to help others. And I noticed a pattern. I noticed that I wasn't the only person who looked at 30 and said, okay, where am I? What am I doing? Where do I want to be? And that's where the Turning 30 niche was born. And I started coaching on this niche just over 3 years ago. I've built an amazing community, and now I get to do it full time. I've been a full-time coach for almost 2 years now. And I think it's an amazing mission, and it's something that I think is very, very needed and very relevant.
Wow, what an incredible journey. I ask that question really to people, because often when I have guests, they can seem quite lofty in what they do. You know, people are like, oh, it's amazing the work you do. And I ask the question simply to remind anyone who's listening that we are human beings, just like if you're listening to this podcast, you know, like your journey through the world of law, into asking big questions, you know, into another sort of career, trying different things as well, I think is an incredible thing. Because I think a lot of us never really do that in our lives. We kind of do our degree, we end up in a job, maybe we take a little bit of a, you know, maybe a slight 45-degree angle change, but we stay in pretty much the same career. And then we feel that we can never leave. We can't get out of that. I'm really hearing from you is that you saw that this wasn't for you and you looked for other options. And we always continually sounds like, you know, when you start to ask the question, continually looking is like, what do I really want to do? What makes me happy? What's meaningful to me? And, you know, coming to coaching, like many of us have done through being coached, you know, and getting to 30 is a really pivotal age for many people. And I see for myself where I turned 30, and I remember the people around me going to me, okay, what does it mean to you? I was like, you know, it's really just another age. Like, I don't feel like my life have to change. You know, in many ways, my life was in a really good place. And it's funny enough, maybe a year and a half later, I was getting on a plane and flying around the world with my then girlfriend. But I think there's this maturing that occurs around this age. You know, I was reading recently, like our brain only fully matures at 25. So by the time we're 30, our brain has only been in its mature state for 5 years for us to really think. And especially when you consider all the big life decisions we are expected to make with an immature brain, you know, whether that's 16, 18, 21, it's a massive decision. So I think it's, when you really think about it, it's almost like all ages of consent should be 25. You know, no one should go to uni before they're about 25 because they should be given the chance to really explore. But, you know, coming to this age, it's like we have this, it's a shift in that first number. You know, we're shifting into like really being mature, like adults, seen in the world as adults. And it's great to hear that you're asking those sorts of big questions, because I think often it happens at 2 stages, I see. And maybe it's more, women are more likely to ask these questions at kind of 30 years old. And I'm seeing more with the men that I work with and I speak to, that men are asking those questions of themselves a little bit later. Maybe around, you know, the 35 to 42 age. You know, what I've started to kind of coin, and I said this recently, is I kind of call it a midlife awakening. Because we have this joke about midlife crisis and, you know, men going off, being a young girl, buying a Porsche. What I see a lot of men now is like yourself, they've gone down the path that they should have gone down, that they should be happy with. They have all the trappings of a successful man. And then they suddenly look around and go, well, I've got all the things are here, all the stuff I was told. But am I really happy? And sometimes it's a trigger from a friend who's gone off and done something wild, or they see something on TV, or they listen to a podcast, or whatever it may be, and they start to ask themselves, am I happy? Maybe it's a question they've never really asked themselves before. And these moments in our lives are incredible opportunities, because we can ask the question and kind of start looking for an answer, wait for an answer, or we can suppress the question and just keep going down the path we've always gone down. But I really hear from what you're saying is you really sat with the question and allowed it to percolate through you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's so many things that you've just said that I want to unpack. But at the end of the day, my branding is ironic. And I hope that people know that when they see me and they see what I'm speaking about, because the truth is, we shouldn't have to have done anything by 30. Like you said before, for you, it's just another year. And it really is. So I always have to say with my branding, you know, it is branding. But at the end of the day, it's what you just described now. It's a signpost. It's a signpost for many people who just stop and then say, okay, so I'm turning 30, or I've just turned 30. What's happening with me? And sadly, many people do that because of the social pressures. So you were just mentioning for you that it happened when you were turning 30, people around you were saying, okay, you know, what's going on with you? And that's what we get. And it happens a lot. People really putting pressure on to do with age. And it's not just, you know, I think springs to mind for most people is family members. So maybe older family members, maybe grandparents, you know, generations above, who by 30, you know, for our parents' generation, being single in your 30s was something quite unheard of. And it's different now for us, but we still get asked those questions. So that's one aspect. But we have to also understand that there's a lot of societal pressures as well. There's a lot of pressure in popular culture. You know, in movies and in TV shows, sometimes in your 30s are really portrayed to be, quote unquote, grown-ups and adults and having bought houses and having already, got children. And, let's talk about Forbes 30 under 30. Like this is one of my pet hates, is that, we're people are being celebrated for having achieved certain things by 30, and that, it's a big part of it. So in my coaching, I call it the 30 manuals. So it's like we have an instruction manual for how we think our life will look by 30. And that instruction manual has been written by or influenced by all of these things that I'm talking about. And it's also really influenced by your community, by your religion, by your race. All of these things as well can also really affect your expectations. A lot of people have more specific family expectations if they're from a certain religion. And I can say that I'm Jewish and secular, so not religious. But that was a huge thing for me because my family, my community expects certain things by a certain age. And it's not a secret. It's not unsaid. And I felt that most of my friends started getting engaged and married at 26, 27. And that's normal. And I was so far away from that. And it's hard because then all of a sudden you don't subscribe to the manuals. You don't follow the manuals. And then when you don't follow the manuals, you think, even if it's subconsciously, that you've done something wrong. You think you've failed in some way. You think you're left behind. And when you are in this space, firstly, it can feel very, very lonely because it feels like everyone else has got their life figured out and that you've not. It can feel like in some way you've not got a hold of things and you're fucking up and everyone else has got their life sorted, which we know is not in any way true. And what I really help clients to do is to let go of these manuals and to write your own manual that isn't based on society's expectations, to really shed what you're supposed to do at this age and decide what you want to do. For some people by 30, they do want to be married. That's a genuine want. And it's nothing to do with the fact their parents told them or, it's something that is expected of them by others. It's because they really want that. And that's amazing. That's great. Everyone should be able to want what they want. And then they can then go towards that goal. But I find that a lot of people that I work with, a lot of people who, I interact with, they don't want those things yet. They're not ready. And I certainly wasn't. And it was a big deal for me to move country at 27, to, start a new career every year. Every year from the age of 27, I was starting something new and doing something different. And I think that it is all about expectations and really being authentic and being in alignment with what you want to do. So that was the first thing that I wanted to answer in response to what you said. And the second thing was about a really important point about men having this pressure a little bit later, because it's true. And when I started out with my niche and targeting individuals turning 30, it was individuals. I never specified, I'm obviously a woman, so maybe I naturally on my content was a little bit more feminine on Instagram and I was maybe attracting women, but I never specifically said turning 30 coach for women. And that was important to me because I did want to work with men. But what I really found was men don't have the same pressure. And I think you can tell me what you think about this, but I think at 30, men whose 20s looked a little differently to someone else's, maybe they, did move country or did do something different or, studied for longer or didn't find a career in something that they liked, then 30 can bring up the questions about money, maybe like financial security. But in general, I think when it comes to relationships, children, settling down, no, I'd say from all of my friends and colleagues and, people I have spoken to, they tell me quite outwardly that for them, it's definitely 35 plus, if not 40. The big birthday of 40 is a big one. And it's because of biological clock. Women, have been also fed a lot of, social pressures now around the 35 fertility cliff and things like this. So, and it's not a lie that women have biological clocks. I think there's a lot of noise around it, more noise than there should be around it for a 30-year-old. But when a woman is single at 30, she's panicking, not always, but a lot of the time thinking, okay, this is the decade that I must have children because I can't have children in my 40s, or it will be much more difficult to have children in my 40s. Whereas men, and you can tell me if this is true or not, for them, having a child in their 40s is something very accessible and something very popular. So that's why I think the big difference is, and I have to say that, I've worked with over 100 clients in the past couple of years, and I've only had one male client.
I think it's interesting what you said there about the social pressures, because I see the same thing with men that I work with. I was even speaking to one of my clients last night, and he's in his early kind of mid-20s, and he was talking about dating from the point of view, and he was like, there's a pressure in the dating world that he feels around, being a certain size in terms of like physical size, muscles, that sort of thing, a certain look, to have a certain amount of money, to have their own place, and to have a vehicle, car to get them around. And the line of questioning I had with him is like, where does this go? Is this true? It's a question I ask people, is this true? And they're like, well, it's expected. I was like, that's not the question. Is it true? Does everyone expect it? And I think, I'm sure you've had exactly the same line of questioning when you're trying to look at these social constructs and how we relate to them, because we actually often relate to them as their laws, their rules that must be followed. Like you said, the manual, when in fact they are, and I'm going to put it out there, it's like, this is something that was made up by somebody at some point, and then other people believed it, and then other people told other people, and then people kept telling people that there's this idea that, say, for instance, the social pressure for women to be in a relationship and start to have children at 30, and then the social pressure for men exists, is around money and career. It's like having your career sorted, being like on the path to getting to the top, having the right job title, having a home, having a car, maybe even thinking about buying a second property. It's interesting that we have these two parallels, that for men, it's all about money. And I think the reason why for me, when I hit 30, there was no kind of, there wasn't that thinking for me, is because I kind of had all those things. I was in a good job. I'd been in that career for a long time. I had my own place, blah, blah, blah. But what we see is it's almost the way that society builds us up and tells us how we're going to be successful in a relationship, right? It's that for a man, you need to build up your financial reserves and your stability financially. For a woman, it's like building yourself up so that you are in the right place to be in a relationship and relationship ready. And it's almost like they've geared us up to meet about like 30, 32, so that we bring the elements of what are needed for a relationship together at that point. But I will stress that these things are just expectations that are put on us by usually people older than us, because when we really look at the media, the movies, all these industries are run by people our parents or grandparents' age, depending on how old you are, right? So these are scripts that are written by people who were never grown up in the era that we did now. So these are really old ideas that are being brought to us and being told to us that this is how it needs to be. And the world has changed, right? We're sitting here, I'm 38 years old. I quit my career of 16 years in technology, which was a very well-paying career. I could have been very successful. I have friends who are have wonderful job titles, head of this, vice president of that. And I chose to leave that at the age of 37 years old to become a coach, to work with men, to work with what many people told me was the hardest demographic of people to work with. People said to me, don't work with men. Work with women. You'll be much easier. You'll be able to get clients much easier. Men are very resistant to sort of work. So in that, I'm just saying that there's all these ideas, all these pressures, they are simply made up. Just like Father Christmas. There literally is no different. It's just that we commonly accept at a certain point that we no longer believe in Father Christmas, but we get into our 30s and we still believe in this idea of how we should be living as, and to use your words, we should still be following that manual.
Yeah, and I love that you use the word manufactured, because it really is. And also it's just outdated in the same way that it's outdated that in the education system, it's from the Industrial Revolution, that we should all be sitting and, facing a blackboard and have a teacher, and it should be that way. It's the same thing that, we think that things have to be in a really set way. So you go to, you should finish school, you go to university, you for me it was move to the big city, so you move to London, but for some people, I'm sure it's different. Maybe it's settle down in your hometown, it's meet somebody, it's find a job in a career and something good, stable, that you're going to stay in. Okay. And then you're going to get engaged, you're going to get married, you're going to buy a property, you're going to have kids, and this works for some people, but for most people in this day and age it doesn't work. And I love that you said about your own story, because we're an example of that. We could have stayed in our careers for sure. I could have been a lawyer. And I think that's what happened to me in my mid-20s, that I saw this life. I saw moving to the suburbs, and I saw, okay, I'm going to be saving to get a mortgage and all of those things. And I didn't connect with it. I didn't want it. And I think that some people do, but a lot of people don't. And I love this conversation that we're having, because I think it's really important for anybody listening who feels that they don't necessarily want that path. It's okay. There are so many people who don't want that path, and they're happy because they've admitted it to themselves, and they're creating the path that they want.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And if you're listening to this and you're not surrounded by people, if you don't know people that have gone a different direction, it's like, start going out of your way to listen to people. Listen to people out there. There's podcasts, there's books, there's Instagram accounts of people who have just taken a different direction. Like, you could go through my last probably 10 main episodes, and I'm just like rattling my brain slightly. It's like, I remember one of my episodes, there's a guy, he used to be at a huge finance company, sales, everything, quit his job to become a leadership coach for men. There's plenty of people who had that mold, have decided that isn't the path they wanted to take, and took a different path, and I'm extremely happy with doing that. So it's just to kind of break, because our minds become so fixated on something that this is how it has to be. This is how it has to be. I have to do this. We tell ourselves those sorts of things. But then when we start to see those examples of something different, our mind starts getting new information and starts to relax and realize that, oh, wait a minute, we start to open our minds to some different possibilities for us.
Yeah, it's exactly. In psychology, we call it the confirmation bias. So if you're now sitting in your cubicle at work, and all of your colleagues or everyone around you is, focused on settling down and talking about, money and all of those kind of what I maybe have a very not good bias of the corporate world. But if that's what you have surrounding you, and then you have a belief from your manual, from somewhere, even if it's subconscious, telling you that that's the next step for you, life should be this way, then your mind will go out and try and prove that to be true. So it's going to go and look at every single person around you who is doing that, and then say, look, that person's doing it. Oh, look, that person that I respect is doing it. My cousin, my best friend, that person I went to school with. And exactly like you've just said, the trick here is to start to find people who I call expanders, who are doing something different, who can expand you and who can inspire you. And once you start finding them, you won't stop, because this is really true. And I think that this has really happened for me as somebody who's single. If I can say this, I'm a single 34-year-old. When I was 33 and I went through a huge breakup, had lots of limiting beliefs about being single in my 30s. And it was like all women who are single in their 30s, when I say 30s, like later in your 30s, are unhappy or looking for a partner or aren't living the life the way that they want. And then when I started questioning those and actually finding evidence for the contrary, it was like, what? I met so many women who love their single status, who their 30s is all about being single. I went off on a remote working trip to Costa Rica last winter, and I cannot tell you the amount of incredible women I came across who were in their late 30s, early 40s, who were living a life that I was just like, wow, I didn't know this existed. So yeah, just to reiterate what you said, go out and try and find evidence and expand your mind to other possibilities.
Yes, so powerful. So powerful to do. So you touched on there, about the dating, being single, being in a relationship in our 30s, and this is the topic that we plan to talk about. But the podcast has a mind of its own. I let it move where it goes. But this, as you mentioned it there, it's like we have this, like you said, these limiting beliefs that came up for you about what it meant to be, single as a woman in your 30s, and the way that society views women at that age. I know from my experience of being a man and dating women in my 30s, but also my partner being 35. I should get that right now. But when we met, she was 33. Getting my maths is very good, people. But I'd be interested to know that, I know we talked about some of them, but like, what are some of the myths, some of them maybe even the limiting beliefs that you held about what it meant to be a single woman in your mid-30s?
Wow, so many. Where do I start? So I think, and actually I saw a reel of yours that you posted, I think yesterday, and I just actually reshared it on my stories about men not doing the work. So I think that there's a limiting belief that women have about men in their 30s, which is that, they're not doing the work, or there are no good men left. That's a big one. I know we have spoken about this to great detail, and I'm happy to open it up again, that we have this limiting belief. When I say we, I'm talking about all women in their 30s who are single, that all the good men are gone. Another belief, limiting belief, is that there are no men in my area. There are no single men in my area. Another belief could be men at this age are damaged, have a lot of baggage. There's a reason that they're single in their 30s and they've decided not to settle down. Trying to think what else. There's a lot of myths around being single as a woman. And I think something, for example, is that all men will expect that I want to get married, which I think is a big one. When you go out onto the apps or go out, in dating, there is this worry that, or almost, I don't know if it's a worry, but there's this perception that men will presume that I want something more serious. And on the flip side of that, the opposite is that women are presuming that men don't want something serious, or that men aren't looking to settle down. Do you want me to carry on? There's loads more myths.
No, I think that's really valuable, actually, especially for men to hear these. I think it's really valuable, because we'll probably later get on to some of the myths that are held that men hold about women as well. I think this is very valuable to say as well afterwards.
Yeah. I think in general, there's just a lot of rhetoric about the dating world being toxic at this age. And I feel as well that this is something new. I was single in my 20s. I got into a relationship when I was around 29. And so I was single for 2 years, from the age of 27, 28, 29. And the app culture was really different then. It was really different. Tinder was new-ish, and there weren't so many apps, and I don't remember hearing about ghosting. And there was just a really different atmosphere around dating. It was like the hangover from pre-digital dating, I guess. So there was still that real life connection was more of an option. And in those few years that I was in a relationship, those 4 years, and I then found myself single at 33, I was super cocky. I was like, yeah, amazing. I actually met my ex-boyfriend on Tinder. And I was like, I love the apps. I met amazing men on Tinder. And I did. I met amazing men, some of who, became friends and had really high regard for the apps. And my other single friends at this point were like, let's see how long it takes you to change your mind. And then you go, went back out into this dating world, and it is a jungle, the apps especially. And I think that it's, I don't know if it's a myth or if it's true, or obviously it's all perceptions, but I think that the online dating world has changed in a negative way in the past years. And yeah, maybe that's something we can dive into.
Yeah, that's an interesting point there. But And I'm really interested in the myths as well around men that are held, and I've definitely taken down note of the toxic dating trolls. I think that's a really important point. But a lot of these myths that women hold about men, really, like if you were to hold a lot of those as true for yourself as a woman holds a lot of those true, it really creates a hopelessness in the dating experience. It's just like, it's hopeless. There's nothing I can do. The power is all taken away from me.
Yeah.
And that would create massive resignation in your interactions with dating, with men. Like if you're coming from that place of those myths, you'd be like, well, this is a bit pointless. This is all going to go bad. This man's going to let me down at some point. Like, you have this perception. And I'm not judging. I'm really just stating what I see as a coach also as well. It's like, how our perceptions really create our reality. The thoughts, the words we tell ourselves really create our reality. Because on the other side of that, I've got men who I speak to on a weekly, daily basis. And a number of my clients are actually in relationships. I seem to have about 50% of my clients are in relationships and want help with strengthening those, which in of itself probably breaks against a myth that a lot of women have about men and their desires for change and so forth. But some of the myths that men hold about women is like, all the good ones are gone. All the women that are left are crazy or desperate. And to speak to what you said about marriage, is like that all women want to tie men down. They want to rush into a relationship. They just want a relationship more than they want the actual man. They want to be in a relationship so they can say, I'm not single, more than they want the actual man. The women aren't sexually adventurous or don't desire sex in the same way that men do. Or one of the other myths is like, around something I think is a bit harsh, to be honest, but I've heard this from a number of men, that women, especially in their late 30s, don't look after themselves in the same way they once did. And I think it's really interesting that a lot of these myths feel like they mirror each other almost exactly.
You literally just took the words out of my mouth. I was just about to say when you were describing it, isn't it crazy to think that there's these beliefs on one side for men being mirrored by the beliefs of women, and when it comes together, like what can happen, which is, pushing, pulling, the dance, like, that happens when you're dating someone. And I just exactly was just about to say, wow, it's so mirrored. Everything you're saying, the myths are just mirroring each other.
And it just creates this massive instability, because imagine you've got two people who meet each other and they're both sitting there having the same perceptions, holding the same patterns of thought about each other. Like, okay, the woman's thinking, okay, well, men don't want to settle down, all the good ones have gone. Why is this guy single? There must be something wrong with him. And then the guy's sitting there going, okay, she's in her mid-30s and she's single. So, oh my God, what's wrong with her? I need to look out for some certain behavior. Oh, she's going to want to tie me down. Like, she's probably not going to really want to have sex or have sex very much or be adventurous with sex. And then what we end up doing is, instead of talking to each other, we're just talking to our perceptions we have of each other. And we actually end up with this like double layer in between each other. I wish I could draw this out, and I've drawn this out for clients before. It's like we end up with like this avatar, these two avatars talking to each other in the middle, and the actual human beings on the outside who aren't actually getting any messages through, because we simply hold so much thinking about what the other is and assumptions and thoughts that we actually don't really receive what we hear. It's kind of like the opposite of rose-tinted glasses, right? So we perceive so much.
It's shit-tinted glasses. That's what it is. It really is, honestly. Yeah. And that's what it feels like to, and when I'm talking about the myths, I just want to reiterate, I am single and I have dated since being single, but I'm speaking also from working with my clients who also go out and date. And, you mentioned 50% of yours are in a relationship and 50% single. So in my clients, I would say it's a little bit more of them are single. But having said that, most of my clients, we actually focusing on a combination of things. So not just dating or relationships. So let's say around 50% of the topics that I will coach on, maybe not even that much, will be around dating. So a lot of these myths that I'm telling you comes from working with women of this age. And I actually just finished a 4-month coaching container with a group of 9 single women in their 30s. And I specifically chose to work just with single women because I wanted to provide a safe space to speak about dating. And yes, exactly like you said, it's the shit tinted glasses. And really what my work is, and I truly have worked on myself enough to be able to do this, is to bring hope. It's exactly what you said before, that all of these myths on both sides create a dating culture of hopelessness and like defeatism, really, that people feel defeated before they've even begun. And the truth is that if you go out into the dating world or into the world in general and you feel hopeless and helpless and defeated about meeting someone, the chance that you're going to meet someone is so much more slim than if you chose to believe that you can. Sounds really obvious, right, when I'm saying it. But I think that a lot of people, and I know my clients, don't understand how much of their behaviors come from these beliefs, come from subscribing to these myths that we're talking about. And that results in them showing up on dates, not in a way that is conducive to dating, to having conversations or avoiding conversations about things for fear of, bringing up that myth, or, for fear of what the other person's going to think. And lots of my clients don't date. They don't. They get very stuck in the point before dating and say, I don't want to date. It's too hard. It's too shit. The glasses are there and it's not for me. So this is a lot of the work that I do. And I get to also live it myself on the side in my own personal life. But the work that I'm doing with clients is to really build hope and to break down these myths. And exactly like you said, ask, is it even true? Is it the truth?
Yeah. And it is this work is like, as a coach, someone asked me recently to describe it, like, what do you do? And as a coach, I never have the same answer. I feel like I just allow whatever comes to me in that moment, which is probably not great marketing, but it feels true for me. It's like I try and get people to think differently. That's it. When the client comes to me and says, oh, I never meet women who I can be vulnerable with, for instance. I'm like, okay, cool. I understand that. Intellectually, I can understand how you would come to that conclusion. And then I start to ask questions about it. I just poke at that statement a little bit. And you come to realize that the number of times after you've had these conversations, you realize that someone has decided this thing before they've really had some experience, or they're holding this thing to be true whenever they're interacting with people. And then you start to ask them to look for times when they were vulnerable, or the women they were dating were vulnerable and open. And when they start to really think about it outside of the lens of their shit tinted glasses, they start to see that, oh shit, like there were times when this was happening. Someone was trying to be open and vulnerable. And I was so fixated on it not being a possibility that I couldn't see it. It's a bit like, to put it into really simple terms, it's like someone shouting your name. But because you're walking somewhere where you don't believe anybody could know your name, you don't hear them, right? And as human beings, we can literally do that. Someone could shout our name, but if we are so in our minds that no one could be calling me, that whole sound would completely pass us by. And it's the same with our thinking and our vision and how we operate in dating. And some people become so entrenched in this, and I imagine you've also experienced this, is they don't want to change their mind. They are righteous. They are correct. This is how it is. And they will fight you when you try and change their mind.
I think that people just also really enjoy, in a weird sadistic way, hating the dating world. And it's and it also happens a lot in friendships, and especially in groups of women, that it's cool, to put down dating. And there's loads of memes about it on Instagram, and it's all funny. And you can have your WhatsApp groups with your friends. And it's like, another date, another story. And that can also be toxic. And I think it's also something that the single culture has given, is that, also with people who are in relationships, who are friends with people who are single, they're like, tell me what's the latest story. I want to hear, you know, the dating stories and things. And it's always like, you know, you've got to have another thing to talk about. So I think that's also, you know, something is exactly like you're saying, people don't want to change. Why? Because in some way it's serving them. In some way it's, you know, usually when we don't want to change, it's because we're comfortable with something, and change would be confronting. It would mean having to do something our brains don't like to do, because obviously our brains just love doing the same thing over and over again. It's just the easy patterns, and it's serving you to not have to either go out and date, or if you're going to date, to have these open conversations and communication. And it's really confronting. And actually I feel really called out by something that you just said about what you were just talking about, how that really great analogy of you can be walking in a place and someone can shout your name. You know, it happened to me. I was dating somebody and I thought it was casual in a way. You know, it wasn't necessarily going for a relationship, and we were getting to know each other and seeing each other for a couple of months. And I just presumed that this person, all the myths, is not really interested, doesn't want to commit, you know, is not really doing the work, not really emotionally intelligent, all of the things that I told myself. And then so I just broke up with him on a message. It's awful to say, I'm admitting it in public, but it was very, you know, it had been casual. So I just sent a WhatsApp and said, listen, for me, I really want to be friends, but I feel like this isn't really going somewhere. And then it's a long story, but the upshot of it was is that eventually I found out that he was really hurt, and he told me, you know, that was really hard for me. I really felt we had a deeper connection. And it was so funny because I'm somebody who holds myself out with so much integrity as somebody who would date. I would never ghost somebody, you know, as if, and all of those things. But it's like what we said, sometimes when you're so far into these myths and these thought patterns that you just don't hear the truth. You don't actually see what's in front of you. And it happened, and it was a very confronting moment. And I'm happy it happened, actually, obviously not at the expense of this person's feelings. And we did, you know, talk it through, and I did apologize. But I think it's important to recognize that even somebody who, you know, I'm a coach, I don't think you can get more self-aware. You can still subscribe to these things, and you can still make these mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You know, we're not immune to this, but it's like we the best thing is, I see it like a meditation. I had this thought the other day. It's like life is like a really long meditation where we try and focus on the thing we want and what's important. And then we lose focus. We get distracted. And the job is always to try and bring ourselves back to focus and not be distracted for too long. We're going to get distracted. We must accept that. So, you know, we're going to get distracted by the myths, the societal expectations, these thought patterns of how people are. But the game of our lives is like, how can we bring ourselves out? How often can we bring ourselves out of that focus back into the focus of what's true, present, and in this moment? You know, it's like a continual process. It's like, instead of beating ourselves up when we do that, it's like an acceptance, a compassion of going, oh, I'm a human being. I'm going to get lost in my thinking sometimes. That's just how this game works. Bringing myself back. Now that is the mastery of life.
Yeah, I love that. I actually call it the path. And I don't know if you can see on my flip chart here, I actually have it open because I was doing a group, and I was exactly the same thing that you create when you coach, or you come into self-awareness, that you create a path, and you often fall off the path and you get lost in the weeds in the jungle, but then you know the path exists. So exactly like you said, you get back to the meditation, you get back to the path. So I love that. I love a good coaching analogy. Look at us coming in with all these analogies.
Metaphors are very powerful for people. So we were talking there about some of the behaviors that kind of come out in dating. And I'm really interested in your thoughts on what are some of the dysfunctional behaviors that men exhibit when dating that really cause their dating lives. I'm going to use the word damage, to be honest, but what are the sort of dysfunctional behaviors that men do?
Good question. Okay, so I have to say it because I've already mentioned it, but ghosting. So I know that's not necessarily dating, because that's when the dating part finishes. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that, and I'm not saying for any, you know, I'm not saying that the women don't ghost, because they do. And I think that it's important. It's really important to recognize that it's not a solely male activity. But I think that it's more popular, or it's more prevalent with men, because, and maybe this is my limiting belief, but I think that they really get nervous about, you know, hurting someone's feelings or showing up and then not being able to have that confronting conversation, even if it is just a message. And the result of that is to just not do anything. And I often think it's almost starts off as innocent, like, oh, I'll wait till tomorrow to send the message, and then the day after and the day after, and then all of a sudden a week's gone by and they think, oh, I didn't hear from her, I won't message now. And I think that often men don't consider how it is to be on the other side of that. Again, really generalizing, but interested to know what you think about that.
Ghosting is a thing that is rife, and I think it's become more rife with the advent obviously of the apps, and it's easier to do, and the fact that people are a bit more throwaway. And do I think men are more guilty of it? I think for a number of reasons. I think they are. I think, I speak to men, and have I been ghosted before in my life? Definitely. A number of times I can think of being like outright gone on a date, texted her afterwards, been like, really enjoyed that, like, let's do this again, and never heard back again. I've definitely done it as well. I'm not gonna lie. I definitely can think of a time where I went on a date with someone, afterwards asked them if they got home safely, and I was on the fence about whether I wanted to see them again. And I really was like, if they really want to see me again, then if I hear from them, then cool. If I don't, I don't. That's cool. And I never did. And I was like, okay, cool. And I can probably think of times where, I've been out on dates with women, I didn't really enjoy it, and I didn't really want to have to explain. I didn't want to have to explain. I didn't want to have to face the backlash that could come from saying, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. And this is probably going back 10 plus years when I was a much younger man. And a lot of it is, I don't want to hurt feelings. I don't know how to deal with the confrontation, right? And also it can come with like, I don't think it will really bother them. It's not, we haven't been doing, we haven't seen each other once, or it's not such a big deal. I think that's also one that comes up for men.
But I just want to point out that for me, and maybe other people don't define it as this, but I don't think after even a first or maybe even a second date, it's necessarily ghosting, depending on how much contact you've had before. If you've been speaking online for like 2 months and then you finally meet and then you don't message again, okay, great, that's ghosting. But if you go on a first date with somebody that you've spoken to a couple of times and you don't message them afterwards, I think it's mutual. And I think that also, and maybe this is something that we actually spoke about on our podcast that we did, is a whole separate topic of, is it the man's responsibility to send the message the day after? And if he doesn't, is he ghosting? After one day, I would say not. For me, the definition of ghosting is when you're already in some form of emotional relationship with somebody and then you just cut it without further notice. That's how I would say it. Whereas I think what we're speaking about is that the post date follow-up. And there's lots of questions around that. Who should send the text? How long should it be? Should it be sent immediately straight after the date that evening? Should it be sent the day after? If it's more than 3 days, should we presume that neither person's interested, neither party wants to continue? So I think that it's like kind of murky waters. But for me, ghosting is more of that, disappearing, literally vanishing.
Yeah. It's a very vague term, ghosting, actually, because I've done some conversations with people about this. Like, I've heard people say, I was talking to someone for a week on a dating app and then they ghosted me. And I'm like, did you see them? No. Did you hang out? No. Did you arrange to see each other? No. And I'm like, wow. So to you, just some messages back and forth, that's ghosting. And then you've got the other end of ghosting, which is, I know this has happened to someone where they were in a relationship with someone, they lived with someone, and they came home from work and that someone was gone. They took all their stuff and they never heard from them again.
Yeah.
Like, that's that extreme end of ghosting. And it's interesting that there's this term ghosting and it's just used so broadly for all these different instances, when really, in a way, it's like, I'm kind of with you. I feel that ghosting is a lot more about, okay, did we spend some time together? We did. And then there was a non-reply to something. Like, there was a non-reply. Like, someone sent a message like, hey, how's your day? And then there was no reply, and there was never a reply. Like, that feels a lot more like ghosting. Whereas if you start to talk to someone and then it's not really going anywhere and someone stops replying, it feels like, that's just dating, man. That's just part of like living, kind of thing.
Exactly. completely on the same page with that. And actually, and maybe other women would not agree with me here. You know, men might also have a very different opinion, but I don't think until you actually physically meet someone in person, you just alluded to this, but I don't think you owe anyone anything. And I think that, you know, it's really important to say, and if I have clients that get upset because somebody that they were going to meet up with cancelled on them or ghosted them, or I don't know, something happened, I will always come back to, until you physically meet somebody in person, you know, the apps can be a game sometimes, and you don't, you know, we need to see them in that way and not take them so seriously. And I do really strongly believe, unless you're in some sort of a long distance relationship with somebody that you haven't met before, you shouldn't expect something of somebody who you've never had physical contact with.
No, I feel like that's a good, really a good barometer, especially adding in what you said about not taking it too seriously. I think this is a big problem that causes people a lot of misery in their dating life, is that they take every single act, that's not even seriously, it's personal. If someone does something, you know, this is something that I see for a lot of people, not just in dating, this is a life thing, right? It's in dating, it's like, oh, if someone didn't want to hang out with me, it means that I am. There's that statement that flies into their mind. It's like, I am worthless, I'm unlovable, or whatever. It's like everything is a personal attack. And when you live in a life where everything is a personal attack, like someone ghosting you is a personal attack, like someone not wanting to pay for the bills is a personal attack, someone not wanting to be in a relationship with you is a personal attack. It's like, you're going to be very angry a lot. You're going to be very angry, you're going to be very frustrated, and you're going to get very, not just angry at the people, you're going to be angry at the world a lot. And you're going to be, you know, life's just going to feel hard continuously moving through the world in that way.
And I think this happens a lot in dating with everyone, that they make it about themselves in an almost narcissistic way. We don't do it because we're narcissists, but we do it because we're the center of our own worlds. And when we think that somebody does something, we get to choose how to respond, right? We always get to choose how to respond. We get to choose how to think. And most people choose, because our minds are set to a negative bias, choose to think that it's something wrong with us. It's easier to think that it's because something I did, it's something I said, it's, you know, it doesn't like the way I look, doesn't like the way I speak, not interested in my career, whatever it is. It's easier to go down that path than it is to say, oh, actually that person maybe has a different want to me, or maybe that person is going through something personal. And that happens a lot, that in the dating game, that if somebody doesn't message us or somebody acts in a not nice way, we make it that we did something wrong. And most of the time, and I have to remind my clients this time and time again, we're all humans having our own human experiences. And I think it's really important to remember that we can't always show up 100% in our dating lives in the way that we want to. Everyone, nobody can. And it's also relevant for us. But when we're so hyper focused on the myth that, you know, the other side going to do something wrong, then we're like clinging on to that and making it about us and not about them. And I know that sounds maybe against the whole, oh, he's just not that into you thing, but I think it just comes to a point where we have to say that people are living their lives as they want to live. And when it comes to dating, not everything is always about how good or bad you are, or how worthy you are as a person. And when you make it about that, then that's when your self-worth gets dependent on others. And that's a very horrible slippery slope to go down.
Yes, it just means that your self-worth is not defined by yourself, but it is defined by other people, and other people who, A, you don't know very well, and B, they don't know you're depending your self-worth on them as well.
Yeah, completely. You asked about toxic dating behaviors. I think that's what that was the original question was. So one that I have to talk about is love bombing. So love bombing is when somebody very, very quickly has very strong feelings and will come out and say and be very expressive. And, you know, I've heard stories, it's never actually happened to me to this extreme, but really heard a lot. And I think I did a story on it once, and I received the most ridiculous amount of DMs in my inbox of people telling me stories like, oh my God, I got love bombed by this person. And it can be to the point of, I love yous after the third date. It can be asking to move in after a few weeks. It can be, if they have kids, meeting their kids straight away, and crazy stories. And I, was reading these messages and thinking, wow, it's such a thing. And it's really toxic. And I think it's something that everyone should look out for. And from where I stand, obviously, again, I want to be clear that I'm mostly interacting with women. So it seems to be a behavioral thing in the dating world that men do, that they have this thing that when they want to attach themselves onto somebody, they just bomb them with love. I don't know how else to say it. Just bomb them.
No, it's a term I've heard of, and it's an interesting one because it almost probably flies in the face of a polar opposite of a toxic behavior that men also do, which is like being disinterested, being half in, half out, right? It's like the polar opposite of that, isn't it? It's like you have one toxic behavior for men is like being really disinterested and being like, yeah, whatever, don't really care, And at the other end, you've got this love bombing, which is a really interesting one because it's like, oh, wait, so a lot of men might be listening to this going, well, but what happens if, you really feel for someone and blah, blah, blah. And, it builds a fear for men of like, oh, so I shouldn't say how I feel and all these sorts of things. But I'm not going to buy into that story either because that's not quite true. Love bombing for me comes from this idea of where we fall in love with the story of a person and we fall in love with the projection of a relationship or projection of being with this person, which could stretch into the future, like it's where we start to go, oh my God, I've been on 2 dates with this person. They'd be perfect for me. My mother would love them. Oh my God, they've been to these places. I'd love to go to those places as well. And we start to future project a life with this person. And we spend so much time doing that. Our brain literally starts to go, oh, we've lived a whole life with this person. My God, I love so many of the experiences we've had and the things we've done and the places we've been. So then when we interact with that person, we've just built 20 years of a life together, right?
Completely. Yeah. I think this is actually something that women are very good at doing. It's fantasizing about the future and creating a fairy tale. I think that it's definitely something that is common. And like you said, it's falling in love with something that isn't actually the truth. And when love bombing happens, if you are a woman who is susceptible to that, then that's when it can be, quite dangerous. And, if you've seen the Tinder Swindler, which obviously is came out recently, and I don't want to go into opinions of it. I think it's a complicated one, but I think it's love bombing has been given almost some airtime. I mean, he's a professional con man, so obviously he was a professional love bomber. But I think that this is what it's almost the topic that we're talking about is somebody comes along and tells you all the things that you want to hear, and you fall in love with the perception of someone who adheres to the fairy tale that at the end of the day, a lot of us, because of Disney and the way we've grown up and all this, the stories that we hear about this person that went on one date and then never left the person's house and now they're married with 3 kids. And it happens a lot that we're told these things, these fairy tales. And yeah, this is the outcome sometimes. And usually with love bombing, the ending isn't happy. It's not a fairy tale ending.
No, it's not. And it's funny you say, I can think of a few people I know who I can think of one of my friends in particular, I think is quite guilty of this. I can think of a time a couple of years ago where he went on a date with a girl. They went on a second date, went on a third date, and she pretty much moved into his place. And they spent, they were together for about a year. But it comes from a place of like, I need this person. I need this person to give me meaning. And as you said, women are also really good at creating story and fantasy and falling in love with that. And I think that, from my experience, I think women act out slightly differently. They may act out in terms of becoming quite attached quite quickly. And not necessarily in the terms of love bombing. It's like, becoming very familiar very quickly, expecting a certain level of communication very quickly. But I think the root of the action is the same. It's this like, I need you in my life to give me meaning and make me worthy. a bit like what you were talking about earlier. And it just means that we're falling in love with that story in the narrative, and it's feeding into this behavior and like this kind of insatiable need to have this person in our lives.
Yeah, and it's codependency, and I think that when a relation starts on a codependent footing, it's difficult to move out of that. So yeah, I really resonate with everything you said.
And I'm interested if there's a few more kind of toxic behaviors you see in men as well.
Another toxic dating behavior, I think you just touched on it, is the avoidance thing. When men can play games or hide away parts of themselves, that is difficult. I think in general, women, we can talk about what women are looking for. I think honest communication and emotional intelligence is up there. And when men aren't ready for that or aren't open for that or just in avoidance of that, it can be toxic. I think the dynamic. Another thing, something that came up for me recently, is talking too much about exes on a first date or a second date, kind of opening that up too soon, which is funny because maybe that's not in alignment with the whole honest communication thing. But I think at the end of the day, there should be some boundaries there and some mystery around, you don't necessarily need to be offloaded or emotionally dumped on about somebody's life. And I think that's another thing as well, that maybe this is something that happens both ways with dating, is that maybe it's something specific to people who are in my world as a coach, is that being somebody's coach on a date or being somebody's therapist. And that can happen as well, where men can come on a date and I think that maybe in a way they're doing it to look for that openness and vulnerability, and it can sometimes turn into a bit of a fixing thing. So I think they're the ones that we've covered are the ones that spring to mind, but I'm sure there are more. And there are lots of other, I think it's different, like the dating app toxic culture, which is something different, which is, the whole booty calls and dick pics and all those kinds of things. But that's separate. I think here we're talking about more the way that people are acting on dates. And when you first start getting to know someone, I think we've covered the main ones.
Yeah. And some of those is like the avoidance and hiding of self is something that definitely, it's actually something I work on with men quite a lot, because it's often I see with them, it's almost it's not necessarily deliberate a lot of the time. It's almost an accidental thing, and it really is rooted a lot in, not necessarily defending them, but I'm just explaining it from a point of view of someone who was quite avoidant as a man. It's a lot of it's rooted in fear, in like a fear of like showing up, a fear of saying too much about oneself. Also rooted in this idea we've told as men as to be a bit mysterious, to be cool and mysterious, especially when you look at a lot of the movies we see, the man that's like mysterious, you don't hear much about him. He leaves a lot of details unsaid. And that's definitely something I see with men, and the vulnerability in that is like being able to like share who one is. It's something that I definitely do a lot of conversations with the men I work with.
I think also, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's a fear of hurting the other side's feelings as well that comes in a lot into play. I think with men, they think if I give too much, then and I don't know, I'm not 100% sure. I'm on a first, second or third date and I like this person, they're cool, I like to spend time with them. I don't know if there's a future. And I'm not going to give parts of myself for fear that if I do, then they're going to get too attached and then I might hurt their feelings. So when you said it's innocent, it comes sometimes from a good place. It comes sometimes from a place of it's better to protect them and protect myself. And I think that I can speak on behalf of women that sometimes it's okay to do these things and know that we're okay. We've got it. Our feelings can be hurt. When anybody dates, you're in jeopardy of hurting the other side's feelings. Just the nature of the game. That's just what dating is. In fact, all relationships, we know at any point that somebody can turn around and break off the relationship. And I think that this is where the communication thing comes in at the start, of just radical honesty. Instead of worrying so much about hurting the other person's feelings, so therefore exhibiting these behaviors that you work on a lot with your clients, is opening up from the start those conversations of, actually, this is where I am. I would love to continue to get to know you. Not 100% sure that, this is it, but let's see where it goes. Can seem a bit harsh. And maybe for the other side, that's not enough. And they'll say, no, actually, I'm not looking for it. Maybe they also feel the same, or they're also open and willing to explore. So that's why I think as well is another fear of the other side. We always often take on the emotional responsibility of the other person in the partnership.
I completely agree. Yeah, it's like I don't want to hurt your feelings. If it's I'm smiling because I'm thinking of myself as like, if I show all of me, you're gonna really like this, and then I'm gonna have to deal with the potential of in 2 days' time me being like, I'm not that keen, and then you being upset and maybe berating me, sending me text messages saying how much of an arsehole I am and all these things. And I say this because I've received these things in the past myself, because this does happen. But actually, it's like, do we need to treat each other like we're porcelain dolls? And I think it's a really interesting point. I was speaking to Natalie from Style Me Sunday a couple of weeks ago, and she said this is like, there's this kind of weird rhetoric. It's like, as men, we're told we need to treat women really delicately, like, don't do anything that could create fear or upset and anger. In many, you can use the example across many parts of society, but yet in a way that isn't really conducive as well, because then it causes us to treat women like porcelain dolls, which can create this hiding, create this like, oh, I can't hurt her feelings, I better not say things that will hurt her feelings. But actually that creates this environment of hiding and, at the worst end, lying.
Yeah. And then she becomes a porcelain doll that she becomes really easy to break, because she's so up, she's so frustrated. I've been on that side of things when you just don't know what the other person's thinking. And I just think that, and this is with any boundary work, we get really, really scared to set boundaries with other people, or to be honest, or to say what we want and say what's right for us, because of the fear that we're going to hurt the other person's feelings. But the outcome that we're creating because we're not doing that is often worse than the outcome of just doing it. It sounds so simple when I say it, but often the atmosphere that we create and the outcome is negative. So it's important to really remember that, even though those conversations can be a little bit confrontational, it can be difficult, it can be outside of the comfort zone, the results of them are usually beneficial for both sides, not just one.
Yeah. And talking about exes is a funny one, because it could just like occur as, it's very similar to emotional dumping. I see is like, it's just speaking unfiltered about our emotions in a space, maybe because we feel safe to do so. Or a lot of the talking about exes often, from my experience, from speaking to the men that I know and also dating women, it's like, it often lands as it's bitching. It's like, my ex this, my ex that. And it usually is a sign of like unresolved, it's unresolved emotions and feelings about a past partner. And it kind of is very similar to the emotional dumping and feeling like you become a therapist, because that someone is just like going, oh, this is what I'm feeling, like this was going on for me. And it's kind of the opposite of the avoidance and hiding, isn't it? It's like an oversharing, an over kind of oversharing of one's emotions and feelings about topics without creating any sort of containing yourself in terms of like, why are you sharing this? What is the purpose of this share? Like, I could tell you about the woes of my life, but if I then say, oh yeah, because like all that stuff happened, and actually like I've learned so much from that, it's helped me to be a better man. I got some coaching, I got some therapy, and like now I've really changed my behaviors, and I look back on that and it's actually been a beneficial thing. That shifts from being emotional dumping into like a vulnerable, powerful, vulnerable story that allows them to get to know us.
100%. It's why context is really important. Like you said, if you some people, when they do have those dates and you really get to the authentic part of the date where you are sharing these stories. And of course, when we're dating in our 30s, most of us have had past relationships, and we've had big breakups, and we've had stories, and we do have baggage, and we have things, that we have learned and want to share. You can have those amazing dates where you do go to those depths. And that's great in the context of it's mutual. It's, like you said, it's a story. It's part of who you are. It's something you want to share. And that's very, very different to trying to fill silence or, like you said, bitching. And I think you can often tell, this is relevant for both men and women, you can often tell something about somebody's character by the way they speak about their ex and the way they speak about the experiences that they've had in the past. And you can tell a lot, is this somebody who's worked on themselves or not, just by the way that they can emotionally converse around it.
Yeah. Can they have some gratitude, and can they say positive things? And I say not so, because there's a spectrum here. There's like looking back on a partner and going, oh, you know what, our relationship wasn't perfect, but I got a lot out of that. And then there's also like, oh my God, she's a bitch, she ruined my life. And then there's also like, oh my God, she was the most amazing person I was with. She was so loving, so kind. There's 3 different ways to describe your ex. And 2 of those show that there's some unresolved emotion there. And one of them shows that you're just looking at it from the point of view of an experience in your life.
Yeah, totally.
And I think the thing that's leapt out to me is you've gone through some of these toxic behaviors from men, and they're all ones that I've seen. I don't think anyone would deny that these things occur and men are guilty of these, but how they have such parallels with women's own behavior as well. And it kind of, goes back to what we were saying before, how there isn't that much, we're standing on 2 sides of a fence, throwing shit at each other, but it's the same shit we're throwing back and forth. We're doing the same things. We're doing, the ghosting, the love bombing, which we saw as like being very attached to each other, the avoidance and hiding. That equally, I see that with some of the clients I work with, the women they date, as being very avoidant, very scared of being committed, even to having another date or seeing where things can go or being in a relationship. And then the opposite of that, being attached very quickly, which is comparable to the love bombing as well. We even talked about the hiding, which can really step into lying, emotional dumping, which is definitely something that happens on both sides. And I'm just struck by, like, men and women are doing the same shitty behavior to each other, right? And acting like it's all the other person's fault. It's a bit like being in a playground, isn't it? And like, I don't know, someone takes some sweets and the teacher comes over and who did it? It's like, they're doing it. I didn't do anything. They're doing it. I didn't do anything. I'm just standing here. It literally, as adults, we are doing this. And what I see is like glaring obvious to me now is like the work that needs to be done, the emotional work, the self-reflective work, the self-responsibility work we can do allows us to eradicate this stuff from our behavior.
Completely. I think that's why our conversations are really important, because I can tell you that our first conversation that we had on this topic of what men in their 30s want really opened up my eyes to the other side, to the work that you do with clients, to the fact that it's not black and white. It's not men in their 30s don't want to commit and women are ready to settle down. I knew that wasn't true, but actually speaking about it really openly, it just makes you see the other side. And I think it's really important. And I agree with you. And I put here, I have a list of what women want in a relationship in their 30s. And I literally just put in capital letters, therapy or coaching, right? They want a man who has worked on themselves. And exactly like you said, that's going to eradicate this silly game that we're all playing in the playground, acting like little kids. Yeah. And it's true. I think that's what, there's a funny meme about it that I saw it the other day. And it was like, at 28, I'm looking for tall, handsome, athletic. And 34, I just want him to have gone to therapy. And it's true.
It's so true. It's funny because I kind of keep track of some of the, not statistics around my clients, but just like one of the questions is about therapy. I don't ask them, usually when you come to coaching conversations, someone tells you they've been to therapy. And a high number of my clients have been to therapy, a very high number. Like we're talking maybe 70, 80% of the men I speak to have been to therapy of some kind. And it really unlocks the door to start to look at one's behavior. Coaching and therapy, in many ways, in so many areas, there's not a huge difference between the two, depending on the coach and the therapist. And it allows us to start to look at this behavior and go, does this serve me? Is this good for me? Is this going to get me to where I want to be? Why am I doing this thing? Like, why do I do this? Like, is it, those are the sorts of questions we ask in that sort of setting. And you kind of touched on my next question, which was going to be, what do women want, and what do they look for in a man when they are in this stage of life, when they are in their 30s?
So I think that the answer to the question is maybe a bit obvious. We've touched upon it quite a few times in our conversation now, but I'll read off my list. Honesty. I think from the outset, just somebody, obviously to not lie, but somebody who is able to be radically honest about themselves, who they are, and also what they want. Okay. So it's not saying wear a badge to the date, saying, availability, but I think that's very relevant if somebody knows from the start that they're not looking for a committed relationship. They're not in a place to start one. Just to say it. It's what women want. They just want to be treated with respect and know, the other side's, what's their kind of availability, I would say. Emotional intelligence. So this links into what we were saying. And again, yes, when I said therapy, I'm using it interchangeably with coaching. I think what it really means is just somebody who's done or doing the work or open to doing it. Because not everybody has already started it, but somebody who wants to have those conversations and is willing to have that, I think it's important to know that your future partner, if and when you got to the point of having to struggle, and it happens, I'm sure, for anybody who is maybe going to one day have kids, from what I understand, it's often a strain on a relationship. And, you want to know that you're with somebody who's able to go to that place where you say, okay, let's work on it. Let's have a conscious relationship. So I'd say emotional intimacy, emotional intelligence is big up there. Safety. So somebody to feel safe with, feel secure. You don't feel like they're a flight risk, that they will potentially ghost you. I also put here sex, which I think is against the myth that we spoke about before, that men think that women aren't looking for sex. And it's completely not true. And in fact, I want to even say something bold, that men often at the start of a relationship want to have a lot of sex, but once you're in a partnership, men's libidos can be lower than a woman's, and women are known to have a higher libido. And I think that I know a lot of my friends who struggle with men that they're dating that can't keep up with the amount of sex that they want. So that's really important, and something definitely I want to break any men's limiting belief who is listening to this now, that women in their 30s are having less sex or want to have less sex. It's just absolutely not true. The other thing I think is that words and actions line up. So if somebody says they're going to do something, then they do it. Not everything else about what is important, I think, is also really down to the individual. So we can talk about love languages. So some people really, really love compliments. They just love being told. They love those words of affirmation. Some people hate it, right? It just depends on who you are as a person. The same thing with, for example, acts of service. So maybe it's really important for you that you're going to be with somebody who is going to do things for you and show you via their actions that they love and care for you. And to another person, that might not be the thing. They might want to just make sure that the person wants to spend time with them and is going to make sure that even though they've got a busy career and a really busy social life, that they're going to be around, that they're going to be available on Friday evenings for dinner after a long week of work or trips at the weekend. And I'd say the last thing that springs to mind, and it's just something that is just popping up now, is consistency. So it's very, very difficult, I think, as a woman, when you start dating somebody and they're really into you, and then all of a sudden they cool it down. And then you'll see them again and then they warm it up again. And then they take a step back. That's a huge red flag. I think when a man isn't consistent, it can feel very unsettling, which links back to the safety. point.
No, and those points are really beautiful. I'm going to relay those back. Like honesty, not lying, honest about who you are, emotional intelligence, doing the work to self-reflect on one's patterns, one's ways of acting, emotions, and how they're driving one's life. Safety and security, sex, which I put 4 exclamation marks next to. There's like words and actions lining up. I've kind of called that integrity. So I think that's a big part of the men's work that I've been part of, is like this integrity. You're talking to men a lot about integrity. It's like what you say and what you do line up with who you are. There's a level of integrity there, and consistency. And what leaps out to me is how similar these are to, I did some research with a group of men a couple of years ago, maybe 18 months ago now, and what they came back with. And it's literally exactly the same things you've got here. Plus support, something that a lot of men I spoke to were like, I want a woman who's going to support me in what I'm doing and understand that, maybe I'm on my mission, my purpose and stuff, and help support me in that. Compassion was a huge one that come up for men, surprisingly. I think it was like second most popular thing that men really wanted from a woman. And one of the other thing was a level of ambition and growth. Those was 2-3 things. And I imagine it's no different for women. And isn't it incredible that we sit here coaching women, coaching men, and the things that we want in a relationship and we want from someone in a partnership are pretty much the same. There might be some, slight differences in terms of like person by person, like you said, but at its core, they're the same traits that we want and we desire to experience from someone. Yet we can't believe that the other person, the other people we meet, might want those same things. We won't allow ourselves to believe that, and I kind of point to the sex piece as one of the kind of central ones. Is that one of the strands of my work I do a lot with men is helping them in relationship when the intimacy starts to die away, and helping them reignite that, because often it's, as you said, it quite often happens that a man's sex drive is high at the beginning, then it dips, the woman starts to increase, which I believe is because of safety, a feeling of safety, like, okay, this man wants me, I know, I feel safe, I can express myself, starts to increase. And for a man, it often starts to dip. Maybe, there's a few reasons why that can be. But actually, this, like you said, women are desiring as much sexual activity and adventure as men are. And I just think it's so interesting that the things that we're looking for are literally the same. But yet, what we've seen from our discussion here is that we don't show up with these things. We don't show up and go, I'm going to do these things myself. Yeah. We show up waiting for the other person to do them, so then we can do them too.
Yes, I'm sitting here like dumbfounded, but seriously, it's so true. And I think this is, in a way, something that might sound like cheesy coaching advice or something that you would read on an infographic, but this is where it comes to taking responsibility for yourself and doing the work on yourself and asking yourself the question: Are you somebody who you would date? It's a really simple question, but you cannot expect from somebody else to meet you in a place that you're not even at. So yeah, I love that point, and I think it's really valid and important, regardless of sex. When I say sex, I mean gender. That you do that 100%. You can't go out and expect things from other people that you're not willing to bring for yourself.
Yeah. And I think I see like the reason why we don't is really just fear, right? It's just fear and a protection of like, okay, I'm scared I'm going to get hurt. This is fear of being hurt, fear of not being accepted, not being good enough, all these things. So that we dull down on these things, We think, okay, well, if I'm really honest, then I might get hurt. So what I'll do is I'll just be like as honest as I need to be, and I'll hide some stuff. And then we'll see how they react, and then I'll see if I can open up some more. Or maybe we'll think, oh, I'm not going to really share what I'm feeling because, then I might get hurt or something like that. Or I'm not going to share how I really feel about sex because if I do that, then maybe the person will take advantage of me. Or I'm not gonna, I know the words I'm saying are this, but I don't want to do the actions in line with that, because that might send a message, the wrong message, whether that's someone you like someone too much or not enough. And you see the thing here, even down to consistency, right? Which is like, I'm going to be inconsistent. Oh, I don't mean to, because sometimes I'm like, oh, I really like this person. Then I think, oh no, I don't want to do that too much, because if they think I like them too much, then they won't want me. And you see there, every step of the way, what is sabotaging people is this fear of being hurt, this fear of not being accepted, and this attempt to protect ourselves, which actually leads to us not getting the very thing that we are in the dating world to get.
This links back so nicely. We've done a loop, like in a stand-up comedy, when the last joke is always something from the middle of the performance. It's like exactly that you were talking about before, right near the start of the episode, when you were speaking about how it's always based on a perception. So you go and you act in a certain way that's based on a perception of the way that somebody else thinks, and therefore it's just two people's perceptions interacting with each other. I'm trying to do the diagram with my hands that you were trying to do before. And it's exactly what you're saying. It's just that it's not the truth, and it has to stop. And the answer is that everyone should get a coach, and then it would stop.
And you know what? The truth is, it really would. It's funny because my partner is also a coach, and sometimes we have these like conversations. I'm like, oh, how's your day going? And she's like, oh, it's good. And I'm like, how are your calls going? And she's like, man, they just don't see the bullshit that they're doing. And I'm like, yep, I know. And then when you tell them, you realize that this thing you're doing here, like, this is causing you not to get the relationship you want. And the clients are like, oh yeah. And I have the same conversations, or this is causing your relationship. Do you see that this action you're taking is causing your girlfriend to get really upset and angry, or to be hurt, or to be pushed away? And they're like, yeah, no, I wasn't thinking about that in the moment. You're like, yeah, because you're reacting to your fear. You're reacting to these thought patterns you have, instead of creating enough space in your brain that you can see this thought, this fear, this worry, this assumption, and actually realize you don't have to follow that train of thought. And you can create that, what I call is like the space there is like consciousness. It's conscious choice between our thoughts and our feelings, or an event outside of us, and a reaction or a response. And in fact, what I see more and more with coaching, with therapy, is simply to allow people to create that space in their minds.
Exactly. And just to create the space to think about it, which in terms of method, and I was joking that everyone should get a coach. Obviously, I think that everybody should, but I know that not everybody is in a position to do that. But if it's something that you still want to create that space for yourself, and you're not ready to dive fully into the work, then start journaling. I mean, I'm a big advocate for journaling in my business and with my clients. It's the first thing I get them to do, because it does exactly what you just said. You all of a sudden see your thoughts in a really different way, and you put them on paper, and you can really start to say, okay, look at what's going on in my mind. And I think that for anybody who is struggling with dating, evaluate your dates afterwards, write them down. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's a way to actually start to make change, is to start to become aware and take responsibility for the way that you're showing up. And writing and giving those thoughts almost like a third, you're giving them a bird's eye view of what's going on in your head, is a really effective tool to do that. That's completely free.
Yeah. Journaling is a really powerful tool, and for exactly those reasons. The tool I always start the guys I work with is meditation. I start them meditating to have the experience of slowing down, because journaling does the same thing. It slows us down. We have to write, and we can't write as fast as we can think. So you have to start to like analyze a bit more of what's going on. But with journaling and meditation, it slows down your thinking, and that's the problem you have. We're reacting so quickly. We don't have any space. We can't slow down, and it's just causing us to react from old habits and patterns that we picked up many, many moons ago.
Completely. Yeah.
Thank you, Emma. I realize we've run over time. We got really engrossed in the conversation. It's just wonderful to talk to you again. Wonderful to bridge this gap, bridge this gap between men and women. Like, it's come up a few times in my podcast conversations. It's just like there's this huge chasm between men and women that isn't really being addressed, and it's being fed in. The gap is being widened by various things, things we talked about earlier. And it's just like, how can we bridge this gap so that we hear each other, we can understand each other better, and realize that we're really not that much different? And I feel like, your contribution today has really helped with that, really like steering that ship to bridging that gap between the sexes.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that every time we have these conversations, it's important. It's education for me that we use for my own personal benefit, but also mostly for my clients. And like you said, it is just really important and really relevant. And I think the reason that we went so over time and we, got so into the topic is because there is so much to discuss. We could probably carry on and record another hour, but obviously we have to stop.
You could always have a whole podcast series and simply this bridging this gap between men and women. Yeah. So I'm sure the wonderful listeners are wondering where they can, check more of you out, hear more of you, and potentially work with you as well.
So I'm mostly hanging out on Instagram. So my handle is at turning30coach. The 30 is numbers. And also my website is turning30coach.com. And I have a podcast, and I really recommend, obviously you've just spent a lot of time listening to our voices, but if you like the topics of conversation, then the Turning 30 podcast is the name of the podcast. And it was about 5 episodes ago, I can't remember exactly the number, when I interviewed you. I really recommend for anyone to go and check that out as well.
I do. It's a wonderful conversation. I highly recommend checking that out, because you'll get the kind of flip side of this conversation, and they probably do meet very well in the middle. If you're a man listening to this, bring this to your male friends actually and sit and listen together. And if you're a woman, like, bring this to your girlfriends and be like, this is a different point of view from this all men are trash, all men are useless, because this is how, as we said, you start to change the narrative with yourself and also the friends you have. And I'm sure myself and Aaron would love to hear from you about what you've learned, what you've been able to take away and action in your own life, in your own dating life, from what we've talked about today.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.